Regarding the larger characters that we see throughout the three Infinity Blade games, describe their personal origins and any alliances that they have or had been engaged in, along with the name and nature of that alliance. So, characters of interest, particularly Ausar, Raedriar, Rith, Worker of Secrets, Archivist, just as many as you can get to there.
I'm impressed with your huge question.
That is a huge question. How many days do you have?
Right. Exactly.
Maybe we can pick one and just kind of delve into.
Yeah. What do you really want to know out of that? Like, if we're gonna start talking in general about that, like, what do you really? What do you hope?
If you could pick one of those relationships you want to know more about.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess primarily then it's just the origins of some of those people, and then also people take interest in alliances such as the Pantheon and who exactly was involved.
Okay.
All the members of the
Maybe we
Pantheon.
can talk about like the God King and the Pantheon.
And they talk about
Yeah.
the Great Pact and things like that. Who was in the
Sure.
Great Pact? Who was part of that?
So, I mean, the books start to allude to kind of a lot of this, and in our minds, maybe this is going too far back, but we'll go back. So, when we were conceiving the Infinity Blade universe, we love the idea of, and we've talked about this even a little bit today. We love the idea of this fantasy story that was really science fiction, and not just science fiction, but grounded in Earth. It's actually taking place on Earth in the future, and we thought we'll slowly even just reveal that over time. I think definitely by the second book and by the end of the third game, it's very apparent that this is Earth. But we wanted to play with some of the mythologies of our planet and extrapolate what would happen if science discovered how to make people live forever. And as we were thinking about that, we thought, man, if tomorrow, some scientist in Canada discovered immortality, would it be in next month's National Geographic? Would they be like, we're all gonna live forever? Would you actually want billions of people overnight to become immortals?
Well, and some of it was just like we started asking ourselves some of these questions that are, what would actually happen to society? What would actually happen, or at least in our minds, if we kind of extrapolate it, what might actually happen if we discovered that? And would it be well known, well publicized, or would that be hidden? Like, because people might start exploring the question of, well, wait a second, aren't we already experiencing like overpopulation of the Earth? What would happen if now all of a sudden the 8 billion people that live on Earth didn't die
and then kept having kids
and kept having babies? Well, that's quite a bit of a population explosion there, right? Like that would cause all sorts of dilemmas. So would it go that route and everybody becomes immortal and everybody keeps having babies and all of a sudden we have 200 billion people on the Earth and then people are starving and die off that way? Like, what would happen?
Or they're immortals, they don't. They just are all lying around.
They're all lying there in piles of people. So we just have piles of people everywhere suffering,
Which I guess that could be a cool game. The piles of people.
There's our next game, piles of people.
Yeah. Okay. That's the next Infinity Blade game.
Yeah,
Infinity Blade, piles of people.
Okay. No, but we thought, no, that's not what would happen. The rich, the powerful, the governments of the world would totally control that science, that technology, and they would only bequeath that to a very few select people. And then we thought, okay, if that happened, then what would happen? Maybe for a couple hundred years things would move along fine, but eventually let's say there was even 10,000 immortals, or even 100,000, they would start to be distanced from mere mortals. They'd be like, oh, these people with their little lives and their little problems, and and over time they would slowly start to amass massive amounts of resources and other technologies and land and power. I mean, because with that much time, you could do almost anything.
And just imagine, so you're in college right now, just starting out. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people in college, their first freshman year, some people party a lot. Some people say, no, I'm here seriously and I'm gonna study and work hard, right? And after 1 year, most people start to become more serious at college after their freshman year, but some people take those two approaches their freshman year. So imagine now that instead of being like that for 1 year, it's 100 years. And we see how far apart people can become in 100 years of time. And what if over 100 years, one person was just like, I'm just going to party for 100 years. And another person was like, I'm going to study and work hard for 100 years. How far apart would those people be after 100 years? Like, that's an entire lifetime. And you think there are problems now with caste problems and people with like at different places in social hierarchies and things like that in the world, and now have people that are multiple hundreds of years apart in where their life experiences are at, where all of that happens, and we think we have a problem with the 1%, the 99% now. Just imagine in a world that was like that, and we have these few elite that are so far beyond everybody else in the human world as far as their experiences, their knowledge, their lifespans, their health, their beauty, everything else, and their riches, their resources, everything. And what would that cause to the world? We would have massive uprisings there would be the mob and trying to, as they start to discover the elite, they would start attacking. They would be like, why can't we have this too? They'd find out about what's going on, and then the elite would be like, no, you can't have this, because if we let everybody have this, it would destroy the world. We'd have all sorts of problems.
So, specific to Infinity Blade. So those are kind of all the ideas that we kind of came up with, and that's kind of how we see the Deathless. So let's start with, I guess, the Worker of Secrets a little bit. So the Worker of Secrets, we think, has been around for a long, long time. And if Infinity Blade was real, which it's not, Infinity Blade's not real. If it was real, he would already have been around a long, long time in 2014. He's been around for a while. And this technology of immortality isn't necessarily a new thing. And it's maybe what has caused a lot of our mythologies and legends about the Greek gods, or even some of the Egyptian gods, or kind of other things that are out there, are these rumors, or even maybe the ideas of superheroes that are popular in our films and comics today come from these rumors and these ideas that maybe there are the remnants of immortals that maybe used to even be more prevalent on Earth.
So almost perhaps to say that this current world is almost like an incarnation of one of the world's
experiments.
Yeah, because as we know, the Worker has destroyed the Earth other times. Right. So however many times he's done this, he's done it multiple times and kind of pushed reset on the world, and regrown it, and he's been around through all of those incarnations.
And we kind of see the Worker as, I don't want to go too much into his exact specific motivations, but I think he really is to us the apex immortal, someone who has been around long enough that he really is trying to understand the limits of what he himself can do, and has kind of gotten to the point where he is very interested in observing and seeing all sorts of things throughout the world, and it's why he's experimenting a lot. And not to say that he hasn't done it before, but in this experiment, or at least the experiment you start to read about in the second book, he's decided, I'm going to share this, and I'm not going to totally just be like, here's how we make immortals, but it's what happens if I allow it to happen? What happens if I allow some people to be immortal? What will that mean? What shape will that take on? And in Infinity Blade 1, 2, and 3, we're seeing kind of, at least in his viewpoint, the end of that, or the end result of that, where we have a world that has been decimated, right? Decimated even in the sense of where the word decimation comes from, where the Deathless, like kind of what Jeremy was talking about, have completely eradicated the mortal population, leaving only a few people left because they still want servants, they still want to bear some technology. Like the God King isn't out making his own castle, right? He still has people doing that for him, But so they need some mortals, but they keep the population in check, and they've split up the Earth among themselves to basically rule in these feudal systems on their own, while they still have their own wars and their own things. But the interesting thing that happened is at some point in in Deathless time, in the not too distant past, something happened that the worker didn't anticipate. He didn't quite anticipate what Alsar was going to do to him. He didn't anticipate getting locked in the Vault of Tears. And
how did that go down exactly? How was he able to trick him?
So I don't want to give too much away, but we can give some of what's going on that we've kind of alluded to. So in the beginning kind of prelude to Infinity Blade 3, where we have the worker kind of talking over the animation we did with Ben Hibben. Now, granted, that's the worker talking to a sword, right? So, and it's totally his viewpoint, right? But at some point, the worker decided that things were getting maybe out of hand's the wrong word, but he decided that
he wanted a method for more precise control over the Deathless.
And so he devised a way to create a way to kill the Deathless, thus the Infinity Blade. So he through a very complicated process that I'm not going to really elaborate on, he created the Infinity Blade. And in so doing, he needed help. And he and Alsar were in a very complicated alliance to gain more control over the Deathless. But they're still, conspiring gods, and something went wrong. Something went wrong in the process of creating the Infinity Blade, and that led to, it might have happened anyway, but it led to the worker realizing that in order for the Infinity Blade to actually work correctly, it needed to be attuned to a Deathless QIP before it could actually work. And that the only way for that to happen would be to attune that over a long period of time, over and over again. And I'm kind of getting off track a little bit, but within that happening, Cyrus or Alsar decided to betray the worker, and the worker decided to betray Cyrus. And the worker's ultimate betrayal of Alsar was they had an agreement that they were going to use Alsar over and over again to create this, to create what was needed to get the Infinity Blade to work. But what they weren't planning, or what Cyrus or Alsar wasn't planning on, was having his memory wiped, and that the worker would essentially be able to checkmate Alsar by getting him to agree to this process, but then in that process causing him to forget who he was. And while that was happening, Alsar was simultaneously devising a way to lock him in a soul cage forever, and therefore get the Infinity Blade himself, and then be able to charge it himself, and then have control over the Deathless. So that event happened, and that's where we kind of found ourselves in this situation. So when the worker finally gets free of the Vault of Tears, he's pissed. Like, that's not what he expected. It's not what he wanted. And so he very quickly moved up his timetable of time to cleanse this thing again and start over.
Yeah, and he was trapped in there for a long, long time.